The rain soaked through my hospital gown as I watched my daughter's BMW disappear around the corner, leaving me standing alone outside Mercy General Cancer Center. At 62, battling stage 3 breast cancer, I'd just been told by my own daughter that taking me to chemotherapy was inconvenient and that I should figure out my own transportation like other people do. She had no idea that the gleaming medical facility behind me, with its state-of-the-art equipment and world-renowned oncology department, belonged to me. She had no idea that the charity case treatment she assumed I was receiving was actually funded by the anonymous donations I'd been making for over a decade. She had no idea that her struggling, divorced mother had built a healthcare empire worth over $400 million, all while pretending to live paycheck to paycheck in a modest apartment across town. Sometimes the most painful treatments happen outside. The chemotherapy chair and the deepest wounds come from the people we love most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Grace Martinez, and I never thought I'd be standing in the rain outside a cancer treatment center, abandoned by my own daughter like yesterday's newspaper. But there I was, water dripping from my hospital gown, watching Madison's silver BMW speed away into the Seattle traffic, as if she couldn't escape fast enough. The automatic doors of Harmony Medical Center whooshed open behind me, releasing a wave of warm, sterile air that carried the familiar scent of antiseptic and hope. Patients and families hurried past, some offering sympathetic glances at the soaked woman clutching a plastic bag of medications. If only they knew that the building towering above us, with its cutting-edge research facilities and world-class oncology wing, was mine. Every piece of equipment humming inside those walls, every breakthrough treatment being administered, every life being saved, it all existed because of decisions I'd made in boardrooms my daughter would never see. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was standing outside my own medical empire, dismissed and discarded by the person I'd built it all for. Madison had made her feelings crystal clear just 20 minutes earlier. "Mom, I can't keep doing this," she'd said, not even bothering to lower her voice in front of the other patients in the waiting room. "Taking you to every appointment, rearranging my schedule, dealing with all this medical stuff, it's disrupting my entire life. You need to figure out your own transportation like everyone else." The other patients had looked away, embarrassed by the public family drama unfolding before them. I'd felt their pity like a physical weight on my shoulders. Here was Grace Martinez, the woman they saw as just another struggling cancer patient, being lectured by her successful daughter about being a burden. "But Madison," I'd whispered, trying to keep some dignity intact, "the treatment makes me so weak sometimes. The nausea, the fatigue, driving myself isn't always safe. Then take a taxi, or an Uber, or ask one of those support group friends of yours." Her voice had carried the same dismissive tone she'd perfected during her teenage years. But now, it cut deeper because it came from a grown woman who should have known better. "I have important clients to meet, Mom. Real responsibilities. I can't keep babying you through this." Babying me. As if fighting for my life was some kind of inconvenience I'd chosen to inflict on her busy schedule. As if the stage 3 breast cancer coursing through my body was a personal failing, rather than a battle I was waging with every fiber of my being. Standing there in the rain, I thought about the conversation I'd overheard last week, when Madison thought I was sleeping in the treatment chair. She'd been on the phone with someone, probably her assistant, speaking in that clipped, professional tone she used when discussing business matters. "My mother's situation is becoming really inconvenient," she'd said, pacing near the window while IV medications dripped into my arm. "These treatments are taking forever, and she expects me to be here for every single one. I mean, I get that she's sick, but other people manage their medical issues without making it everyone else's problem. The person on the other end must have said something about family obligations because Madison had laughed. Actually laughed. Family obligations are one thing, but this is getting ridiculous. She acts like she's helpless, like she can't figure out basic transportation. It's not like she's destitute or anything. She has options. She just chooses to rely on me instead. If she only knew how many options I actually had. If she only knew that the struggling divorced mom she was so embarrassed by could solve her transportation problem with a single phone call to any of the dozen executives who reported directly to me. If she only knew that her mother's helplessness was the carefully maintained facade of a woman who'd been pretending to be ordinary for so long that sometimes I forgot who I really was. The rain was getting heavier now, soaking through the thin hospital gown and chilling me to the bone. My latest round of chemotherapy had left me more vulnerable to cold than usual, and I could feel my body starting to shiver uncontrollably. I needed to get inside, needed to get warm and dry, needed to prepare for the treatment that would hopefully shrink the tumors that were trying to steal my future. But I also needed a moment to process what had just happened. My daughter, the person I'd sacrificed everything to protect and provide for, had just abandoned me in my moment of greatest need. Not because she couldn't help, but because helping me was inconvenient for her lifestyle. Madison Martinez, successful marketing executive for one of Seattle's most prestigious firms, couldn't be bothered to support her mother through cancer treatment. The same Madison who'd graduated summa cum laude from the University of Washington, whose education I'd quietly funded through anonymous scholarships and grants. The same Madison who lived in a luxury condo in Belltown, whose down payment had been mysteriously covered by a first-time buyers program that existed solely because I'd created it through one of my charitable foundations. She thought she'd built her success through talent and hard work alone, never knowing that her mother had been smoothing the path ahead of her for years. Every opportunity that had come her way, every door that had opened, every connection that had advanced her career, none of it was coincidence. It was love, expressed through the shadows, by a woman who'd chosen invisibility over recognition. I finally turned toward the entrance of Harmony Medical Center. I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Pale, thin, wearing a hospital gown that had seen better days, clutching a plastic bag like some kind of charity case. This was who Madison saw when she looked at me. Not a mother fighting for her life, but an inconvenience to be managed and eventually discarded. She had no idea she was looking at Dr. Grace Martinez, the woman who'd revolutionized cancer treatment protocols, who'd founded 3 research hospitals, who'd been quietly saving lives for over 2 decades while pretending to struggle with basic living expenses. The automatic doors opened, welcoming me into the warmth and safety of my own creation. But for the first time since my diagnosis, I wondered if all the pretending had been worth it. If protecting Madison from the truth about my success had been an act of love or an act of cowardice. The receptionist smiled warmly as I approached, not recognizing the soaked woman in the hospital gown as the anonymous benefactor whose donations had funded her salary for the past 5 years. "Mrs. Martinez," she said kindly, "they're ready for you in treatment room 7. Can I get you a warm blanket?" I nodded gratefully, still shivering from my abandonment in the rain. As she wrapped the heated blanket around my shoulders, I made a decision that would change everything between Madison and me. It was time for my daughter to learn who her mother really was. Most people who meet me see exactly what I want them to see. Grace Martinez, 62-year-old divorced woman living modestly in a small apartment in the Fremont neighborhood of Seattle. I shop the clearance racks at Target, drive a 15-year-old Honda Accord that makes concerning noises when it rains, and carefully count coupons at the grocery store checkout. My neighbors know me as the quiet woman in 4B who waters her plants, on the fire escape, and occasionally asks to borrow a cup of sugar. What they don't see is the woman who sits on the boards of 4 major medical institutions, who holds patents on breakthrough cancer treatment protocols, and who has quietly revolutionized oncology care across the Pacific Northwest. They don't see the late-night video conferences with researchers in Boston, the encrypted emails coordinating million-dollar grants, or the detailed reports I review each morning about patient outcomes at facilities I own but can never publicly claim. My apartment tells the story I need it to tell. Secondhand furniture carefully selected to look respectable but struggling. A small television that's definitely not smart, though the laptop hidden in my bedroom closet is worth more than most people's cars. Generic brand everything in the kitchen, while I fund research into nutrition therapies that could change how cancer patients recover. It's a performance I've perfected over 23 years, and I've become so good at it that sometimes I almost believe it myself. Madison thinks she knows my story. Poor Grace, divorced when Madison was 12, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, never quite able to get ahead financially. She's watched me clip coupons for decades, seen me decline expensive restaurants because they're not in the budget, witnessed me turn down gifts because they're too much. She has no idea that I could buy the restaurant instead of just eating there, that the gifts I refuse could be purchased without checking my account balance, that the budget I claim to follow is fiction written to protect her from a truth she's never been ready to handle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The irony of my current situation isn't lost on me. Here I am, receiving treatment at a cancer center I built from the ground up, being treated by doctors whose research I fund, using equipment I personally approved for purchase. Every morning when I check in for treatment, I walk past the dedication plaque in the lobby that reads, "In honor of anonymous donors whose generosity makes healing possible." That's me, the anonymous donor being treated like just another charity. Case: Dr. Patricia Evans, my oncologist, has no idea she's treating the woman who recruited her from Johns Hopkins 5 years ago with an offer too good to refuse. The treatment plan she's designed for me follows protocols I helped develop through research grants to universities across the country. The chemotherapy drugs flowing through my IV were tested in trials I quietly funded, refined through studies I commissioned, approved through processes I helped streamline. Madison sees none of this complexity. To her, I'm simply Mom, the woman who struggled to pay for her school clothes, who worked double shifts to keep the lights on, who sacrificed everything to give her daughter opportunities she never had. It's not entirely false. I did sacrifice everything, just not in the way she imagines. The real sacrifice was choosing invisibility, choosing to let my daughter believe her mother was ordinary instead of extraordinary, choosing to watch from the shadows as she built a life based on the assumption that success and ambition were foreign concepts to the woman who raised her. I sacrificed recognition, pride, and the simple joy of having my daughter truly know who I am. My daily routine is a masterpiece of calculated humility. I take the bus to most appointments, timing my arrivals carefully to avoid peak hours when I might be recognized by medical professionals who know my real identity. I pack simple lunches in reused containers, shop at thrift stores for clothes. I wear to maintain my image and live in studied modesty while my real estate portfolio spans 3 states. The hardest part isn't the pretending, it's the loneliness. When Madison dismisses my opinions about medical matters, not knowing I helped shape the very treatments she's researching online to help me understand my condition, I have to bite my tongue. When she explains basic health insurance concepts, to me like I'm a confused elderly person, rather than someone who helped design healthcare policy at the state level, I have to nod appreciatively. She means well, my daughter. She calls every few days to check on me, though the conversations have become increasingly strained since my diagnosis 6 months ago. She asks about my little support group at the cancer center, not knowing that 3 of the other patients are there because of programs I initiated. She worries about my finances, offering to help with co-pays and medication costs, unaware that I'm receiving treatment that would typically cost hundreds of thousands of dollars completely free because I own the entire facility. "Mom, you need to apply for financial assistance," she told me last month, pulling up forms on her laptop while we sat in my tiny living room. "There are programs for low-income cancer patients. You shouldn't have to worry about money on top. of everything else. I'd accepted the forms gratefully, knowing I'd quietly file them away with dozens of other well-meaning documents Madison had printed for me over the years. Applications for senior discounts, information about low-income housing, brochures for food assistance programs. All offered with love, all unnecessary, all accepted with the grace required to maintain my carefully constructed reality. The truth is, I don't need financial assistance. I need something far more valuable and infinitely more elusive. I need my daughter to see me as I really am. But after 23 years of careful deception, that seems as impossible as curing cancer itself. Sometimes, late at night, when the chemotherapy nausea keeps me awake, I lie in my narrow bed in my modest apartment and think about the parallel life I could be living. I could be in the penthouse suite of Seattle's finest hotel, receiving concierge medical care, surrounded by fresh flowers and get-well wishes from colleagues who respect my contributions to their field. I could be honest about my exhaustion, my fear, my need for support, without worrying about maintaining character consistency. Instead, I'm Grace, the struggling cancer patient, grateful for any attention from her busy daughter, too proud to ask for help, too set in her ways to accept change. It's a role I've played so long and so thoroughly that sometimes I wonder if the real Grace Martinez still exists underneath all the careful performance. But every morning when I wake up, every day when I choose the costume over authenticity, every moment when I swallow truth to preserve Madison's version of reality, I remind myself why I started this elaborate charade in the first place. I was protecting her. I was teaching her values. I was ensuring she'd love me for who I was, not what I had. The question I'm finally ready to face is whether any of those justifications were ever true, or if I've simply been protecting myself from the possibility that knowing the real me might not be enough. The crisis that would define the next 23 years of my life began on a Tuesday in March, when Madison was just 14 years old. I remember the date exactly, March 15th, because it was the day my world split into before and after, the day I learned that success could be used as a weapon against the very people you're trying to protect. My husband David had been growing increasingly resentful of my career for months. What started as Dr. Grace Martinez, promising young researcher at Pacific Northwest Medical Institute, had evolved into something he hadn't bargained for when we married. My work on targeted cancer therapies was gaining national attention. I was being invited to speak at conferences, consulted by pharmaceutical companies, courted by research hospitals across the country. The modest salary I'd started with had grown into something substantial, and the patents I was developing promised to make us very comfortable financially. David saw it differently. To him, my success was a personal attack on his masculinity, a daily reminder that his wife was out-earning him, out-achieving him, outgrowing the small life he'd envisioned for us. He worked in insurance claims processing, steady, respectable work that paid the bills, but would never change the world. Every night when I came home energized by breakthrough research or excited about new funding opportunities, he grew more sullen, more bitter, more determined to cut me down to size. Madison needs her mother became his favorite weapon. You're never home. You're always traveling for conferences. You care more about your precious research than your own family. It was manipulation disguised as concern, control masquerading as traditional values. The irony was devastating. Everything I was building, the research, the patents, the growing reputation in oncology, was motivated by family, by the desire to create something meaningful, something that would provide security for Madison's future, something that might prevent other families from losing loved ones to diseases I was learning to fight. I wasn't abandoning my family. I was fighting for it in the most profound way I knew how. The breaking point came when I was offered the position that would change everything, Director of Oncology Research at Harmony Medical Institute, with funding to build my own research facility and develop the treatment protocols I'd been dreaming about. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to save thousands of lives, the foundation for everything I would eventually become. David's response was swift and devastating. "Choose," he said, that March evening, standing in our kitchen with papers already drawn up by his lawyer. "Choose your precious career or choose your daughter. Because if you take this job, if you prioritize your ambition over your family one more time, I'll make sure Madison knows exactly what kind of mother she has." I thought he was bluffing. I thought love would win over pride, that our marriage could survive his wounded ego. I was wrong about the depths of his resentment, and catastrophically wrong about what he was capable of when his sense of masculine superiority was threatened. The custody hearing was a masterclass in character assassination. David's lawyer had prepared meticulously, painting me as an absent mother obsessed with professional achievement at the expense of maternal duty. They brought in Madison's school counselor, who testified that she often mentioned missing her mother, who was always working. They presented evidence of missed school events, late pickups from activities, evenings when David had to handle dinner alone because I was in the lab. What they didn't mention was that I missed those events because I was developing treatments that would eventually save thousands of children from losing their parents to cancer. They didn't mention that those late nights in the lab were spent perfecting protocols that would revolutionize how we fight the disease that kills more mothers than any other cause. They didn't mention that every sacrifice I made was motivated by love. Love for Madison, love for the families I could help, love for a future where cancer might be preventable rather than terminal. Judge Harold Morrison listened to it all, with the expression of a man who'd already made up his mind. His own wife had been a homemaker for 30 years. His daughters had chosen teaching and nursing, appropriately feminine professions that didn't threaten the natural order of things. When he looked at me, I could see his judgment. Here was a woman who'd forgotten her place, who'd prioritized selfish ambition over sacred motherhood. "Mrs. Martinez," he said during his ruling, "while I don't question your love for your daughter, I am deeply concerned about your priorities. A child needs stability, consistency, and a mother who puts family first. Your professional accomplishments are admirable, but they cannot substitute for maternal presence." He awarded David primary custody. I got every other weekend and Wednesday, evenings, with strict conditions. I had to maintain stable employment in a traditional setting. No more research travel, no more conference presentations, no more late nights in the lab developing treatments that could save lives. I had to provide a nurturing home environment focused on family values. Translation: remember your place as a woman and mother first, professional second. Most devastatingly, he ruled that my excessive focus on career advancement suggested I might use financial resources to inappropriately influence Madison's development. Any significant changes in my financial status would trigger a custody review. Any evidence that I was prioritizing career over motherhood would result in further restrictions on my parental rights. David's lawyer had been clever. They hadn't just won custody, they'd created a legal framework to keep me small, to ensure that Dr. Grace Martinez, the rising star in oncology research, could never fully emerge without risking the loss of my daughter entirely. That night, sitting in my car outside the courthouse with legal papers that had just redefined my entire existence, I faced an impossible choice. I could fight the ruling, appeal the decision, risk everything on the chance that a higher court might see the injustice in punishing a mother for being successful. But fighting meant months or years of legal battles, during which my relationship with Madison would be further poisoned by courtroom drama and parental conflict, or I could disappear. Not physically, I could never abandon Madison, but professionally. I could become small enough to fly under the radar of custody reviews. I could maintain just enough success to provide for her while appearing ordinary enough to satisfy judges who believed mothers should know their place. The decision I made that night would protect my relationship with Madison while destroying everything I'd worked to build. But at 39 years old, faced with the choice between professional fulfillment and maternal love, there was really no choice at all. I would become Grace Martinez, the woman who chose family over ambition, motherhood over career, love over recognition. But I would do it in a way that let me keep fighting the fight that mattered most, just from the shadows, where judges and ex-husbands couldn't see me changing the world one research grant at a time. The real tragedy wasn't what I gave up. It was what Madison would grow up believing about her mother, about women, about the price of choosing between love and achievement. She would learn that her mother was ordinary, unremarkable, someone who'd never aspired to anything greater than getting by. She would never know that her ordinary mother was quietly revolutionizing cancer treatment, saving thousands of lives, building an empire of hope and healing that would outlast any custody ruling or judicial prejudice. At least, that's what I told myself as I drove home to begin the most elaborate deception of my life. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Becoming invisible while building an empire required the kind of strategic planning I'd once applied to molecular research, except now I was engineering my own disappearance rather than breakthrough treatments. The morning after the custody hearing, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, mapping out a life I'd never imagined needing to live. First, I had to quit my position at Pacific Northwest Medical Institute. Dr. Patricia Chen, my mentor and department head, was devastated when I submitted my resignation. She'd fought to get me the promotion, had seen my potential to revolutionize oncology research, had personally recommended me for the director position that would have launched my career into the stratosphere. "Grace, this is insanity," she said, pacing around her office like a caged animal. "You're throwing away everything we've worked for. This custody ruling, we can fight it. We can get affidavits from colleagues, prove that your research saves lives, show that your work makes you a better mother, not a worse one." I shook my head, though every fiber of my being screamed that she was right. The judge was clear. Any evidence of excessive career focus triggers a review. David's already watching for reasons to take Madison away completely. I can't risk it. "So you're going to what? Become a lab technician? Waste your brilliant mind on routine blood work while other researchers take credit for breakthroughs you should be making?" She didn't understand that I had no intention of wasting anything. I was simply learning to work in the shadows, to influence outcomes without claiming credit, to change the world without being seen doing it. It would be harder, more complex, infinitely more frustrating, but it would allow me to keep fighting while protecting what mattered most. The job I took at Westside Community Clinic was deliberately humble. Medical records clerk, filing paperwork, managing patient databases, earning a modest salary that satisfied the court's requirement for stable, traditional employment. To everyone who knew me, including Madison, it looked like a dramatic step down from my research career. Dr. Grace Martinez, the woman who'd published groundbreaking papers on targeted therapy, was now a filing clerk who processed insurance forms. What they didn't see was that the job gave me access to patient data across the entire healthcare network. I could track treatment outcomes, identify gaps in care, spot patterns that larger institutions missed. I could see where research was needed most urgently, where funding could make the biggest difference, where small changes in protocol could save lives. More importantly, the job gave me cover. Grace Martinez, records clerk, could attend medical conferences as a continuing education requirement. She could network with researchers, pharmaceutical representatives, and hospital administrators as part of her professional development. She could ask intelligent questions about treatment protocols because she was trying to better understand the files she processed every day. Within 6 months, I'd established the first shell company. Cascade Medical Consulting, LLC, existed on paper as a healthcare administration firm that helped small clinics optimize their operations. In reality, it was my vehicle for channeling money into research projects I identified as promising. The consulting fees I charged were modest enough to avoid attention, but the grants Cascade funded were substantial enough to accelerate breakthrough discoveries. The hardest part wasn't the technical aspects of building a hidden empire. It was watching Madison process what she believed was her mother's failure. At 14, she was old enough to understand that divorce often meant financial struggle, that her mother's new job represented a significant come-down from her previous career. She never said anything directly, but I could see the worry in her eyes when I wore discount store clothes to parent-teacher conferences, the embarrassment when her friends' mothers talked about their important careers while her mother filed medical records. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked one evening while I was paying bills at the kitchen table. She'd been watching me sort through what appeared to be a stack of financial concerns. Past due notices I'd printed from template websites, budget worksheets showing a single mother struggling to make ends meet, official-looking documents that painted the picture of someone living paycheck to paycheck. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, making sure she could see me putting a medical bill in the to-pay-later pile. "Just figuring out priorities. Your school clothes are more important than some of these other things." She nodded solemnly, accepting the narrative I was constructing. Her mother was sacrificing for her, struggling to provide, making difficulty choices between necessities. It was partly true. I was sacrificing, though not in the way she understood. I was sacrificing recognition, professional satisfaction, the simple pride of being known for my accomplishments. Behind the scenes, Cascade Medical Consulting was growing. I reinvested every dollar of profit into new research initiatives, identifying promising young scientists whose work needed funding, small biotech companies developing innovative approaches to cancer treatment, medical device manufacturers creating technologies that could improve patient outcomes. I became a ghost investor, appearing at medical conferences as Grace, the humble records clerk who asked surprisingly insightful questions, disappearing into networks of researchers who never quite remembered where they'd met the woman who later funded their most ambitious projects. The breakthrough that would define everything came during Madison's sophomore year of high school. Dr. Michael Thompson at the University of Washington had developed a novel approach to immunotherapy that showed incredible promise in early trials, but he couldn't secure funding from traditional sources. The treatment was too experimental for conservative investors, too risky for established pharmaceutical companies, too innovative for government grants that preferred incremental advances over revolutionary leaps. I knew it was brilliant. I'd been following his research through my network, had seen the preliminary data, understood the potential to transform how we treat aggressive cancers. Under my real identity, I could have picked up the phone and connected him with venture capitalists, research institutions, pharmaceutical giants who would fund his work in exchange for licensing rights. Instead, I had to work through intermediaries. Cascade Medical Consulting approached Dr. Thompson through a series of referrals, presenting ourselves as representatives of an anonymous benefactor interested in supporting innovative cancer research. The funding came with no strings attached, no licensing requirements, no publication restrictions, no credit demanded. Just pure support for pure science. The treatment he developed with that funding is now standard care for certain types of aggressive breast cancer. It saved thousands of lives, including some of the women I've met in my own support groups at Harmony Medical Center. Dr. Thompson won awards for his breakthrough, was recruited by major research hospitals, built a career on the foundation I'd quietly provided. He has no idea that his anonymous benefactor was the woman filing insurance paperwork at a community clinic, the same woman who would later need the treatment he'd developed. By Madison's graduation from high school, I'd established a network of shell companies, charitable foundations, and investment vehicles that allowed me to influence medical research across the Pacific Northwest while maintaining my cover as a struggling single mother. I owned pieces of biotechnology companies, funded research at major universities, supported innovative treatments at hospitals throughout the region. Madison saw none of this complexity. To her, I was simply Mom, the woman who worked a modest job, lived in a small apartment, shopped carefully, and lived within limited means. She was proud of how hard I worked, grateful for the sacrifices she believed I was making, determined to build a successful career that would honor what she saw as my struggles. She had no idea that her mother's struggles were performance art, designed to protect our relationship, while I quietly revolutionized the field that would eventually try to take my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was building an empire to fight cancer while pretending to be ordinary, creating treatments for a disease I would eventually need, saving lives while convinced I was protecting the most important relationship in my own life. The elaborate deception had become its own kind of treatment, painful but necessary, designed to preserve what mattered most while attacking the problems that threatened everything I loved. I just never imagined that the cure might be more dangerous than the disease. Living two lives simultaneously became an art form I never wanted to master. By the time Madison entered college, I had perfected the delicate balance between Grace Martinez, the struggling records clerk, and the invisible force reshaping cancer treatment across the country. Every day required a performance so complete that sometimes I forgot which version of myself was supposed to be real. My mornings started at 5 a.m. with encrypted video calls to researchers in Boston, reviewing clinical trial data while Madison slept in her childhood bedroom during college breaks. I'd sit in my tiny kitchen, laptop balanced on a table I'd bought secondhand 15 years earlier, making decisions about million-dollar research grants while wearing a bathrobe from Walmart. By 7 a.m., I'd transform back into ordinary Grace, making coffee in a discount store mug, checking the bus schedule, preparing for another day at Westside Community Clinic. The clinic job had become perfect cover. As Senior Medical Records Administrator, a promotion I'd carefully orchestrated after 5 years of exemplary performance, I had legitimate reasons to attend medical conferences, network with healthcare professionals, and stay current with treatment developments. My colleagues saw dedication to professional growth. They had no idea I was using these opportunities to identify investment targets and research partnerships. Grace really knows her stuff. Dr. Sarah Kim, the clinic director, would tell visiting physicians. She asks the smartest questions at every conference. Sometimes I think she could have been a researcher herself if circumstances had been different. If only she knew that circumstances hadn't prevented anything. They'd simply forced me to become a researcher who worked without credit, a scientist who published through proxies, an innovator who influenced breakthroughs while remaining officially invisible. The emotional complexity of maintaining this double life was exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Madison would call from the University of Washington, worried about my finances, offering to get a part-time job to help with expenses. "Mom, I know things are tight. I can work at the campus bookstore, send you money for groceries." Her concern was genuine, heartbreaking, and completely unnecessary. "Sweetheart, your job is to focus on your studies," I'd tell her, carefully modulating my voice to sound appropriately grateful, while privately knowing that her struggling mother had just approved a $2 million grant for pediatric oncology, research at Seattle Children's Hospital. "I'm managing fine. These medical bills are just paperwork. Insurance covers most of it." The medical bills were real, though not for the reasons Madison assumed. I'd been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer during her junior year, but I couldn't let her know the full extent of my treatment without risking exposure of my real financial situation. So I created an elaborate fiction about community health, center care, sliding fee scales, and charity programs that explained why her mother's cancer treatment wasn't bankrupting our family. In reality, I was receiving care at Harmony Medical Center, the facility I'd been quietly funding for over a decade. Dr. Patricia Evans, my oncologist, had no idea she was treating the anonymous benefactor whose donations had funded her research fellowship and equipped her treatment center with state-of-the-art technology. The irony was profound. I was being treated with protocols I'd helped develop, using equipment I'd purchased, by doctors whose careers I'd supported, all while pretending to be a charity case whose treatment was covered by programs I'd established. The treatment was successful. Early detection, aggressive intervention, clean margins, excellent prognosis. But the experience of fighting cancer while maintaining my double life added layers of complexity I hadn't expected. During chemotherapy sessions, I'd sit in the treatment chair reviewing research proposals on my tablet, approving funding for breakthrough treatments while poison dripped into my veins. Other patients saw a dedicated employee catching up on work. They didn't know I was making decisions that would affect thousands of cancer patients across the region. Madison insisted on accompanying me to several appointments, despite my gentle protests. "Mom, you shouldn't go through this alone," she said, taking time off from her marketing internship to sit beside me during treatment. Her presence was simultaneously comforting and terrifying. I loved having her support, but every moment together risked exposure of the elaborate fiction I'd constructed. "The nurses here are so nice," Madison observed during one visit, watching the staff treat me with what she interpreted as typical professional kindness. She had no idea that their warmth came from personal gratitude. 3 of the nurses had received continuing education scholarships I'd funded, and the head nurse's daughter had been treated in the pediatric wing I'd helped establish. The most challenging aspect wasn't technical logistics, it was emotional authenticity. I had to express appropriate worry about treatment costs while knowing money was no object. I had to accept Madison's offers to research financial assistance programs, while having intimate knowledge of every charity and grant program in the region. I had to pretend gratitude for basic care while receiving the most advanced treatment available anywhere in the world. "I found this amazing support group," Madison told me excitedly after spending hours researching resources online. "They meet at the Cancer Center twice a week. It's free, and they help with everything: emotional support, practical advice, even financial counseling if you need it. I joined the support group, both because Madison expected it and because it provided valuable insight into patient experiences at my own facility. Sitting in that circle every Tuesday evening, listening to other cancer patients share their fears and struggles, I gained perspective on healthcare from the patient side that no boardroom discussion could provide. Their stories influenced policy decisions I made through my foundations, guided research priorities I funded through my companies, shaped treatment protocols I helped develop through my network. The other group members embraced me as Grace from the clinic, the woman who understood medical terminology but still struggled with the emotional impact of cancer. They had no idea that their input was directly influencing how cancer care was delivered throughout the Pacific Northwest. Their complaints about wait times led to staffing increases I quietly funded. Their concerns about treatment side effects guided research initiatives I supported. Their fears about recurrence informed early detection programs I established. Meanwhile, my business empire continued expanding. By Madison's senior year of college, I controlled stakes in 12 biotechnology companies, funded research at 8 major universities, and had established treatment centers in 4 cities. The Cascade Medical Network had become a regional powerhouse, though its ownership structure was so complex that even my lawyers sometimes struggled to track all the connections. The financial returns were substantial, but money had never been the primary motivation. Every investment decision was guided by one question: will this save lives? The biotechnology company developing targeted therapies for triple-negative breast cancer got funding because those treatments could help women like me. The university, research into genetic markers for hereditary cancers, received grants because that knowledge could protect families like ours. The treatment center focusing on rural healthcare access was established because geography shouldn't determine survival rates. Madison graduated summa cum laude with a degree in marketing and communications, landing a prestigious job at Henderson and Associates, one of Seattle's top marketing firms. Her success filled me with pride that I had to carefully moderate. Her struggling mother couldn't be too knowledgeable about corporate hierarchies or salary negotiations. "I think I really impressed them in the interview," she told me over dinner at my small apartment, her excitement infectious. "They asked about my experience with healthcare marketing, and I mentioned helping you navigate all this medical stuff. They seemed to think that showed good problem-solving skills." She had no idea that Henderson and Associates had been specifically instructed to consider her application by a client who happened to be one of my shell companies. Her qualifications were genuine. She'd earned every achievement through talent and hard work, but I'd ensured the opportunity was available when she was ready for it. The double life had become so natural that I sometimes forgot which identity I was supposed to be inhabiting. At Madison's graduation party, I found myself discussing pharmaceutical patent law with another parent before catching myself and switching back to confused questions that Grace the records clerk might ask. At medical conferences, I had to remember to appear impressed by innovations I'd personally funded rather than commenting on them with the expertise of someone who'd guided their development. The loneliness was profound. I couldn't share my professional successes with the person who mattered most. When breakthrough treatments I'd supported made national news, I had to pretend to learn about them from television reports rather than celebrate developments I'd made possible. When researchers I'd funded won prestigious awards, I watched their acceptance speeches alone, knowing I'd never receive credit for the role I'd played in their success. But every Tuesday evening in that support group, every moment Madison worried about my health, every time she expressed pride in how strong her mother was being through cancer treatment, I reminded myself why the sacrifice was worthwhile. I was protecting her from the burden of wealth, teaching her authentic values, ensuring she loved me for who I was rather than what I possessed. At least, that's what I told myself as the elaborate deception grew more complex and the distance between us grew wider despite our physical proximity. The woman Madison knew as her mother was real, just incomplete. And someday, I promised myself, I'd find a way to show her the rest of the story without losing what we'd built together through years of careful, loving lies. The first crack in our relationship appeared during Madison's second year at Henderson and Associates, though I didn't recognize it as the beginning of the end at the time. She'd been promoted to senior account coordinator, handling marketing campaigns for several healthcare clients, and her confidence was growing along with her salary. Success looked good on her. She carried herself differently, spoke with newfound authority, and began viewing the world through the lens of someone who was finally making it in life. "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation," she announced one Saturday afternoon, standing in my small Fremont apartment with the expression of someone who'd made an executive decision. She gestured around the cramped space with barely concealed frustration. "This place is depressing. You've been here for 15 years, and it's not getting any better. The carpet is stained, the kitchen appliances are ancient, and that water stain on the ceiling is spreading." I looked around the apartment I'd carefully maintained to appear appropriately modest, not squalid enough to cause alarm, but humble enough to reinforce the narrative of a single mother who'd never quite achieved financial stability. The stained carpet was strategically placed. The outdated appliances were functional, but deliberately unfashionable, and the water stain was actually artfully created with diluted coffee to suggest ongoing maintenance issues I couldn't afford to fix. "Madison, this place has character," I said, employing the kind of defensive pride that someone in my supposed situation might feel. "It's affordable, and it's been a good home for us. Not everyone needs luxury to be happy." "Character?" Her voice pitched higher with incredulity. "Mom, there's a difference between being humble and living in denial. You work at a medical clinic. You should understand the health implications of living somewhere with water damage and poor ventilation. This isn't about luxury, it's about basic quality of life." She was right, of course, though not for the reasons she imagined. The apartment was carefully designed to look worse than it actually was, but even my performance had limits. I could see her embarrassment when she brought friends over, could feel her tension when she had to explain why her mother lived somewhere that reflected so poorly on both of us. "I've been looking at places," she continued, pulling out her phone to show me rental listings. "There are some really nice one-bedroom apartments in Ballard, maybe Fremont Heights. Still affordable for your income level, but clean, updated, somewhere you wouldn't be embarrassed to invite people." The assumption stung more than it should have. Madison believed her mother had never been in a position to invite people anywhere, had never hosted gatherings or entertained guests in spaces worthy of respect. She was trying to help, but her help was rooted in pity for a woman she saw as having settled for less than she deserved. "Sweetheart, I appreciate the concern, but I'm comfortable here," I said, watching her face cycle through frustration and disappointment. Moving is expensive, and there are always hidden costs. First month's rent, last month's rent, security deposits, moving expenses. It adds up quickly. "I could help with the deposits," she offered, and I could see the internal calculation she was making. Her salary versus what she assumed were my expenses, her success measured against what she believed was my failure to thrive. "I'm doing well at the firm. I can afford to help my mother get settled somewhere decent." This was exactly what I'd feared when I started the deception. Madison measuring her worth against my apparent lack of achievement, feeling obligated to rescue the woman who'd raised her from circumstances that seemed to reflect poorly on both of us. She was succeeding, which should have filled me with uncomplicated pride, but her success was creating distance rather than connection. "I don't want your money," I said more sharply than intended. "I've managed my own affairs for years, and I'll continue doing so." The conversation ended in strained silence, but it established a pattern that would define our interactions for the next several years. Madison became increasingly frustrated with what she saw as my stubborn refusal to accept help or improve my circumstances. I became increasingly defensive about choices I couldn't explain without revealing truths I wasn't ready to share. The healthcare industry connections made everything more complicated. Madison's marketing firm landed a major contract with Pacific, Northwest Medical Group, and suddenly she was attending the same conferences I frequented, networking in the same professional circles where I operated under my real identity. I had to be constantly vigilant, ensuring that Grace Martinez, the records clerk, never encountered Madison Martinez, the marketing executive, in situations where my extensive knowledge might seem inappropriate. "You know, Mom," Madison said one evening over dinner at a restaurant she'd chosen, someplace nice enough to demonstrate her success, but not so expensive that she worried about my ability to afford my half of the bill. "I've been learning so much about healthcare administration lately. The complexity of medical billing, the challenges of patient advocacy, the politics of research funding. It's fascinating how the whole system works." She spoke with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new world, having no idea that her mother had been shaping that world for over a decade. When she explained concepts I'd helped develop, when she mentioned researchers whose work I'd funded, when she described innovations I'd supported from conception to implementation, I had to respond with the appropriate level of impressed confusion. "That sounds very complicated," I'd say, watching her face light up at the opportunity to educate her mother about subjects I knew more intimately than almost anyone in the region. "You're learning so much in your new position." The worst moments came when she'd share industry gossip that directly involved my work. "There's this amazing anonymous donor who's been revolutionizing cancer treatment in the Northwest," she told me excitedly during one of our monthly dinners. "Nobody knows who they are, but they've funded incredible research. My client at Children's Hospital says this mysterious benefactor has basically transformed pediatric oncology in the region." I nodded with appropriate interest, while privately knowing that every program she was describing existed because of decisions I'd made in boardrooms she'd never see. The pediatric oncology wing she was praising had been designed according to specifications I'd provided based on research I'd commissioned. The treatment protocols she found so impressive had been developed with funding I'd allocated through foundations I'd established. "It must be someone incredibly wealthy," Madison continued, "but also someone who really understands healthcare from the inside. The donations are too strategic, too well-targeted to come from typical philanthropists who just write checks without understanding impact." She was describing me with perfect accuracy while looking at me with the kind of patient affection reserved. For someone who couldn't possibly understand such sophisticated concepts, the irony was painful. My daughter was praising the work of someone she didn't recognize as the woman sitting across from her. The emotional distance grew wider as Madison's career advanced. She moved into a luxury condo in Belltown, started dating a successful lawyer, began traveling for work to conferences where she presented marketing strategies to healthcare executives who knew me by reputation, if not by sight. Her world was expanding while mine appeared to be contracting. "Mom, you seem so isolated," she observed during one visit to my apartment, her concern genuine but painful to hear. "When's the last time you went out with friends? Do you have anyone you talk to besides people at work?" The truth was that I had professional relationships with some of the most innovative minds in medicine, but I couldn't maintain personal friendships without risking exposure of my double life. The support group at the cancer center provided some social connection, but those relationships were built around shared struggle rather than shared interests. I was lonely in ways that Madison couldn't understand because I couldn't explain the isolation that came from living an elaborate lie. "I have my routines," I said, gesturing toward the stack of medical journals I read every evening. Research publications that kept me current with developments in fields I was helping to shape. "I'm not as social as some people, but I'm content." Content. The word hung between us like a bridge neither of us could cross. Madison heard resignation, acceptance of limitations, satisfaction with less than what life might offer. I meant something entirely different. The complex satisfaction of work that mattered, of influence exercised responsibly, of a life lived with purpose, even if that purpose had to remain hidden. The gulf between us wasn't just about money or living circumstances. It was about fundamental misunderstanding of who I was, what I valued, what I'd accomplished with my life. Madison saw stagnation, where I saw strategic patience, limitation where I saw conscious choice, failure where I saw sacrifice in service of higher goals. But I couldn't explain any of that without destroying the elaborate fiction that had protected our relationship for over a decade. So I accepted her pity, endured her well-meaning efforts to improve my circumstances, and watched our connection strain under the weight of truths I couldn't share and assumptions I couldn't correct. The woman Madison thought she knew was becoming a burden to the woman she was becoming, and I had no idea how to bridge that gap without losing her entirely. The promotion that should have been a celebration became another wedge between us. Madison was named Senior Vice President of Healthcare Marketing at Henderson & Associates, making her one of the youngest executives in the firm's history. At 31, she was managing multi-million-dollar campaigns for major medical institutions, advising hospital systems on public relations strategies, and presenting to boards of directors across the Pacific Northwest. I was incredibly proud of her achievement, though I had to carefully modulate my response to match what Grace the records clerk should know about corporate hierarchies and executive compensation. When Madison called to share the news, I could hear the excitement in her voice mixed with something else, a note of anxiety that made my chest tighten. "Mom, this is huge," she said, her words tumbling over each other in her eagerness to share. "I'll be overseeing campaigns for some of the biggest healthcare systems in the region: Seattle General, Pacific Northwest Medical Group, even Harmony Medical Center. Can you believe it? The cancer center where you get your treatment is going to be one of my clients." The irony was staggering. My daughter would now be marketing the medical facility I owned, developing promotional strategies for treatments I'd helped create, working to increase public awareness of programs I'd established through anonymous donations. She would be sitting in boardrooms adjacent to meetings where I made decisions about her professional future, separated by walls and elaborate deceptions, but operating in the same sphere of influence. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I managed, hoping my voice conveyed appropriate maternal pride without revealing the complex emotions churning beneath the surface. "You've worked so hard for this opportunity." "The salary increase is substantial," she continued, and I could hear her taking a deep breath before the next part. "Mom, I want to help you. Really help you. Not just with moving expenses or small things. I can afford to make a real difference in your quality of life now." This was the conversation I'd been dreading for years. Madison's success was creating financial capability that matched her generous heart, and she was determined to use her resources to rescue her mother from circumstances she couldn't understand, were carefully constructed rather than genuinely limiting. "I've been thinking about this for months," she said, her voice taking on the confident tone she used in professional presentations. "You shouldn't be taking the bus to cancer treatments. You shouldn't be living in that apartment with the water stains and the ancient appliances. You shouldn't have to worry about medical copays or prescription costs or any of the financial stress that makes fighting cancer even harder." Each offer felt like a small knife turning in my chest. She was trying to solve problems that didn't exist by providing help I didn't need, motivated by love but founded on complete misunderstanding of my actual circumstances. "Madison, I appreciate the thought, but no, Mom, please let me finish." Her voice carried the assertiveness that had made her successful in marketing but felt overwhelming in our personal relationship. "I've already talked to a financial advisor about the best way to help family members. I can set up a monthly transfer to cover your rent, maybe help you lease a reliable car, definitely handle your medical expenses. You've sacrificed so much for me over the years. It's time for me to take care of you." The word sacrifice hung in the air between us, loaded with assumptions that broke my heart. Madison believed her mother had given up opportunities, settled for less, accepted limitations for her daughter's benefit. She had no idea that every apparent sacrifice had been strategic choice, that every limitation was performance art designed to protect our relationship while I pursued work that actually mattered. "I don't want to be a burden to you," I said, which was true in ways she couldn't comprehend. The burden wasn't financial. It was emotional. The weight of accepting help I didn't need while maintaining deceptions that were becoming harder to sustain. "You're not a burden. You're my mother." The frustration in her voice was clear now. "Why is it so hard for you to accept help? Is it pride? Because pride doesn't keep you warm when the heating system in that apartment breaks down again." Was right about the heating system. It had been broken 3 times in the past year. Carefully orchestrated maintenance issues that reinforced the narrative of a landlord who didn't care about tenant comfort. The repair delays were fictional, but Madison's concern was genuine, and her inability to fix her mother's problems was clearly causing her distress. The tension escalated during her first client presentation at Harmony Medical Center. I learned about it through my usual channels, the monthly executive briefing where marketing initiatives were discussed alongside medical developments and facility improvements. Madison Martinez from Henderson & Associates would be presenting a public awareness campaign for our cancer treatment programs, focusing on accessibility and community outreach. I couldn't attend the presentation without risking exposure, but I reviewed the materials afterward through my administrative access. Madison's work was brilliant. She'd identified gaps in community awareness about early detection programs, developed strategies to reach underserved populations, and created messaging that balanced hope with medical accuracy. She was proposing initiatives that would save lives by encouraging earlier intervention and connecting patients with resources they might not know existed. What she didn't know was that every program she was promoting had been designed with input I'd provided through my network of medical advisors. The early detection initiatives she wanted to publicize existed because I'd funded research into screening protocols. The patient support services she planned to highlight had been established through foundations I'd created. The accessibility programs she proposed to advertise were possible because of endowments I'd quietly provided. The presentation went amazing, she told me over dinner that week, her face glowing with professional satisfaction. The medical director was so impressed with our research. He said we clearly understood their mission in ways that surprised him. "I think we're going to get the contract extension and maybe expand into other service lines." Dr. Harrison Webb, the medical director, was someone I'd personally recruited from Johns Hopkins 3 years earlier. His surprise at Madison's understanding was probably genuine. He had no idea that her strategic insights were informed by intimate knowledge of the institution's actual priorities and capabilities, information she'd absorbed through years of listening to her mother discuss work problems that were actually major healthcare policy decisions. "You should be proud of yourself," I said, and meant it completely. Her success was legitimate, earned through talent and hard work, even if some of the opportunities had been quietly orchestrated. "You're making a real difference in how people access cancer care." "It feels good to work on something meaningful," she agreed. "I mean, all marketing is about connecting people with things they need, but healthcare marketing actually saves lives. When we increase awareness about screening programs, people catch cancer earlier. When we promote support services, patients get help they wouldn't have known existed." She was describing the exact impact I'd hoped to achieve when I started funding these programs, but hearing it from her perspective was bittersweet. Madison was passionate about work that intersected with mine in ways she couldn't imagine, motivated by the same desire to help people that had driven every decision I'd made since her custody hearing 20 years earlier. The near-miss moments were becoming more frequent and more dangerous. At a regional healthcare conference, I watched from across the lobby as Madison networked with executives I knew personally, discussing innovations I'd funded, sharing insights about medical trends I'd helped create. She moved through that professional environment with confidence and expertise, clearly belonging in conversations about the future of healthcare in ways that filled me with pride and terror in equal measure. "There's this incredible anonymous benefactor who's been funding breakthrough research," I overheard her telling a group of hospital administrators. "Nobody knows who they are, but their impact on cancer treatment in this region has been transformative. I've been trying to figure out how to incorporate that story into our marketing. The idea that innovation comes from unexpected places, that healing happens because of people who care more about impact than recognition." She was standing less than 20 feet away from the anonymous benefactor she was describing, but the gulf between us felt infinite. Madison was building a career around promoting work I'd made possible while believing her mother was too limited to understand the complexities of the field she was helping to shape. The emotional toll was becoming unbearable. Every success Madison achieved felt like a reminder of the authenticity I'd sacrificed to maintain our relationship. Every moment of pride I felt in her accomplishments was shadowed by the knowledge that she was succeeding in a world where I existed, but couldn't be acknowledged. The elaborate deception that had once felt like protection was becoming a prison, and I was running out of ways to maintain the fiction without losing either my sanity or my daughter's respect. Something had to give. The question was whether it would be my carefully constructed identity or the relationship I'd built everything around protecting. The moment that shattered 23 years of carefully constructed lies came on a Thursday afternoon in November, during what should have been a routine chemotherapy session. My cancer had returned, more aggressive this time, requiring intensive treatment that left me weak and nauseated for days afterward. Madison had been increasingly insistent about accompanying me to appointments, her concern growing as she watched what she believed was her mother's deteriorating financial situation compound her health struggles. "Mom, I'm taking you to treatment today, and I don't want to hear any arguments," she'd announced the night before, using the tone that had made her successful in boardroom negotiations. "You look exhausted. You can barely keep food down, and you shouldn't be taking public transportation in this condition. I've cleared my afternoon." I'd tried to dissuade her, knowing that spending extended time at Harmony Medical Center increased the risk of someone recognizing me in contexts that would be impossible to explain. But Madison had already arranged coverage for her meetings, had already planned to work from the treatment center's family lounge, had already made the decision that her mother's health took priority over professional obligations. We arrived at the cancer center together, Madison supporting my arm as we walked through the lobby past the dedication plaque that credited anonymous donors for making healing possible. She checked me in at the registration desk, speaking with the staff who knew me as both patient and benefactor, though only I was aware of that dual identity. Mrs. Martinez is here for her 2 p.m. appointment, Madison told the receptionist, displaying the kind of protective assertiveness that emerged whenever she felt her mother was being underserved or overlooked. She's been having severe nausea between treatments, and Dr. Evans wanted to adjust her pre-medication protocol. The receptionist smiled warmly, perhaps more warmly than standard patient service would typically warrant, though Madison interpreted this as typical medical professionalism. Of course, Dr. Evans is running just a few minutes behind, but we'll get you settled in treatment room 7 right away. Can I get you anything while you wait? Water, blankets, magazines? That would be great, Madison said, clearly pleased by what she saw as exceptional patient care. My mother really appreciates how well you take care of people here. We were settled in the treatment room within minutes, and I was connected to the IV that would deliver chemotherapy drugs developed through research I'd funded, manufactured by companies I held stakes in, administered according to protocols I'd helped refine. Madison pulled out her laptop, determined to stay productive while supporting me through the 3-hour treatment session. I'm working on the Harmony Medical Center campaign, she said, opening files that contained promotional materials for the facility where we were sitting. The board approved our proposal to expand the public awareness initiative. We're going to highlight the patient support programs, the research connections, the accessibility services, really show people that this isn't just a treatment center, it's a comprehensive healing environment. She had no idea she was describing programs I'd personally overseen, services I'd funded, research collaborations I'd facilitated through my network of anonymous foundations. Every success story she planned to feature, every innovation she intended to promote, every breakthrough she wanted to publicize could be traced back to decisions I'd made while pretending to be too ordinary to understand the complexities of medical administration. The most fascinating part is the anonymous donor situation, Madison continued, scrolling through documents that detailed the financial history of programs I'd established. This place has received millions in targeted donations over the past decade, but nobody knows who's behind it. The giving pattern is incredibly sophisticated, not just money, but strategic support for specific research initiatives, equipment purchases, staff development programs. Whoever this is understands healthcare from the inside. I closed my eyes, partly from the fatigue that accompanied chemotherapy, and partly from the emotional exhaustion of listening to my daughter analyze my life's work without recognizing my involvement. The IV dripped steadily, delivering medications that might save my life, while Madison unknowingly praised the woman who was making that salvation possible. I keep thinking it must be someone with personal connection to cancer treatment, she mused, unaware that the person with the most personal connection was lying in the treatment chair beside her. Maybe someone who lost a family member or a recovered patient who wants to give back. The donations are too targeted, too emotionally intelligent to come from typical corporate philanthropy. Her phone rang then, her assistant calling about a scheduling conflict that required immediate attention. Madison stepped into the hallway to take the call, leaving me alone with the nurse who was monitoring my treatment. I could hear fragments of her conversation through the partially closed door, her voice carrying the authority and competence that had made her successful in managing complex professional situations. That's when I heard the other conversation. That would change everything. 2 of Madison's colleagues from Henderson and Associates were in the family lounge, apparently waiting for another client meeting. Their voices carried clearly through the treatment center's corridors, and I recognized them from company events Madison had occasionally mentioned. Senior account managers who worked on healthcare campaigns. Madison Martinez is here with her mother, one of them was saying. Poor woman's getting chemo. Looks pretty rough. Madison's been struggling with the whole situation for months. It's gotta be hard, the other replied. Watching a parent decline while feeling responsible for their care, especially when there are financial pressures. The financial thing is what gets me, the first voice continued. Madison makes good money now, keeps offering to help, but her mother is too proud to accept support. Classic lower-income stubbornness. They'd rather struggle than admit they need help. Madison mentioned that her mom works at some community clinic, right? Filing or something? Must be hard watching your daughter succeed while you're stuck in a dead-end job, dealing with cancer on top of everything else. I felt the blood drain from my face as their casual conversation continued, dissecting my life with the kind of detached sympathy reserved for unfortunate circumstances they'd never personally experienced. The worst part is how it's affecting Madison professionally, the first voice continued. She's been distracted lately, leaving meetings early for medical appointments, turning down travel opportunities because she doesn't want to be away from her mother. It's admirable, but it's definitely impacting her career trajectory. She needs to set better boundaries. The second agreed. You can't save someone who won't accept help. At some point, she's going to have to choose between enabling her mother's pride and protecting her own professional advancement. Madison returned to the treatment room just as I heard her colleagues discussing the impact of my situation on her career prospects. She was smiling, energized by whatever professional crisis she'd just resolved, completely unaware that 20 feet away, her co-workers were analyzing our relationship like a case study in familial dysfunction. "Sorry about that interruption," she said, settling back into the chair beside my treatment bed. "Crisis averted. Where were we? Oh, right. The anonymous donor mystery. I actually have a theory about who it might be, but I could barely focus on her words. The casual cruelty of her colleague's assessment was reverberating through my mind, revealing how my carefully constructed persona appeared to people in Madison's professional world. I wasn't a mother making strategic sacrifices for her daughter's benefit. I was a burden holding back a promising career. I wasn't a woman choosing humility over recognition. I was someone too stubborn to accept help, too proud to acknowledge limitations, too set in my ways to change. Madison saw none of my distress, focused on her laptop screen and the marketing campaign that would promote medical services I'd made possible. "I think the anonymous donor might be a former patient," she said, scrolling through research about philanthropic giving patterns. "Someone who was treated here years ago, maybe before they became wealthy, and now they're giving back out of gratitude." She was describing me with perfect accuracy while looking at me with the patient affection reserved for someone who couldn't possibly understand such sophisticated concepts. The woman she was theorizing about was sitting 18 inches away from her, connected to an IV delivering treatment in a facility that existed because of my vision and my money. But the gulf between us had never felt wider. The treatment continued. For another hour, Madison working on promotional campaigns for my programs, while I processed the devastating realization that everything I'd tried to protect through deception was being destroyed anyway. My relationship with Madison was suffering because she saw me as a burden rather than a partner, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be celebrated. The anonymous donor she was trying to identify was the mother she was slowly losing. Respect for, not because of who I was, but because of who I'd convinced her I wasn't. As the chemotherapy session ended and we prepared to leave, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The breaking point wasn't a single moment of revelation. It was the accumulated weight of 23 years of lies finally becoming heavier than the truth I'd been trying to protect. Walking out of Harmony Medical Center that afternoon, supporting each other against the November cold, neither Madison nor I realized we were approaching the end of one relationship and the potential beginning of something entirely different. The question was whether either of us would survive the transition. The revelation came exactly 1 week after the breaking point, on a gray Seattle morning that would forever divide my life into before and after. I had made the decision during a sleepless night, lying in my modest apartment bed while rain drummed against windows that overlooked a city where I wielded invisible influence, but commanded no recognition. The weight of living two lives had finally become unbearable, and Madison's declining respect for the woman she thought I was had made the choice inevitable. I called her at 7 a.m., knowing she'd be in her Belltown condo preparing for another day of marketing medical services I'd helped create. "Mom?" Her voice carried the careful patience that had become standard when dealing with what she saw as my increasingly unreasonable behavior. "Is everything okay? You never call this early." "Madison, I need you to come to Harmony Medical Center this morning," I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to destroy and potentially rebuild. "There's something I have to show you. Something I should have shown you 23 years ago. Mom, if this is about your treatment schedule, we discuss this. I can't rearrange my calendar every time you have an appointment. I have the Morrison Industries presentation this morning, and this isn't about treatment. This is about truth." The words came out harder than I intended, cutting through her professional protestations. "I need you to come to the administrative offices on the 7th floor. Ask for Grace Martinez, Chief Executive Officer." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When Madison finally spoke, her voice was small, confused. "Mom, what are you talking about? There's no way you—" "The 7th floor is executive offices. You file medical records." "Ask for Grace Martinez, CEO," I repeated. "Tell them you're my daughter. They'll know what that means." I hung up before she could respond, before I could lose my nerve, before 23 years of carefully constructed lies could reassert their hold over my choices. Then I drove to Harmony Medical Center, not in the rattling Honda Civic that Madison knew, but in the black Mercedes that had been sitting in my private garage, waiting for the day I finally chose authenticity over deception. 45 minutes later, I was sitting in my real office, the executive suite that occupied the entire northwest corner of the 7th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay and walls lined with medical degrees, research awards, and photographs from conferences where I'd presented breakthrough findings under my own name. The office Madison had never seen, in the building where she'd recently presented marketing campaigns for programs I'd created. My assistant, Jennifer, buzzed the intercom. "Dr. Martinez, your daughter is here. She seems confused. Send her in." The door opened, and Madison stepped into my world for the first time in her adult life. I watched her face process the impossible. The expansive office with its cherry wood desk and leather furniture, the walls covered with accolades bearing my name, the view that suggested serious executive authority, the woman she'd known as a struggling records clerk sitting behind it all, like this was perfectly normal. "This is—" she started, then stopped, her marketing executive composure completely abandoned. "Mom, whose office is this? Why are we here? Is this some kind of joke?" "Sit down, Madison." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same chair where I'd made decisions that affected thousands of patients, hundreds of medical professionals, millions of dollars in research funding. "This is my office. This is where I work. This is who I really am." She remained standing, her eyes moving around the room as if searching for evidence that this was an elaborate prank. "Your office? Mom, you work at Westside Community Clinic. You file insurance paperwork. You take the bus to work every day. I do work at Westside Community Clinic, 1 day a week, to maintain cover for a deception I've been living for over 2 decades. I opened the folder I'd prepared, the same kind of documentation that had revealed Patricia Martin's empire in the story that had inspired my own elaborate fiction. "Madison, I am Dr. Grace Martinez, Chief Executive Officer of Harmony Medical Center. I own this facility. I've owned it for 15 years. The folder contained everything: incorporation documents showing my ownership stake, research publications bearing my name, correspondence with medical institutions across the country, financial statements that revealed the scope of what I'd built while pretending to struggle with basic expenses." Madison flipped through the pages with growing disbelief, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something approaching horror. "These are your signatures," she whispered, holding up a patent application for cancer treatment protocols. "These are your medical degrees. These are— Mom, these are awards for cancer research dating back to before I was born. All mine. The anonymous donor you've been trying to identify for your marketing campaign? That's me. The breakthrough treatments you've been promoting? I funded the research, the patient support programs you're highlighting in your presentations. I designed them based on 20 years of studying what cancer patients actually need. Madison sank into the chair, the folder sliding from her fingers and scattering across my Persian rug. This isn't possible. You live in a tiny apartment. You worry about medical bills. You take the bus to chemotherapy because you can't afford a car. I live in that apartment because maintaining the deception required absolute consistency. I worry about medical bills you think I have because explaining my actual treatment costs would have revealed everything. And I take the bus because Grace Martinez, the records clerk, doesn't own 3 cars, even though Dr. Grace Martinez, the CEO, does. 3 cars? Her voice was barely audible. I pressed the intercom button. Jennifer, could you have someone bring my daughter some water? And perhaps you could show her the employee recognition wall in the lobby, specifically the dedication to anonymous donors that made our pediatric wing possible. Madison's face was pale, her usual professional confidence completely shattered. The pediatric wing. You funded the pediatric wing. I funded most of this facility, actually. The research labs, the patient support services, the clinical trials that develop new treatments. It's all connected to a network of foundations and companies I've built over the past 20 years. 20 years. She was processing the timeline, her marketing mind trying to construct a narrative that made sense. Since the divorce, since Dad left, you've been pretending to struggle while actually, what? Building a medical empire? Building. Something that matters, something that saves lives, something that could help people like me when the time came. I gestured toward the IV port still visible under my sleeve. The chemotherapy I'm receiving? I helped develop the protocols, the equipment delivering my treatment. I approved the purchase orders, the staff caring for me. I recruited half of them personally. Madison stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. That overlooked the city where she'd built her career in the shadow of achievements she'd never known belonged to her mother. Do you know what this means? Every success I thought was mine, every opportunity I earned, every door that opened, you earned, I said firmly. Whatever else you're feeling right now, understand that. Your intelligence, your work ethic, your creativity, that's all you. I may have created some opportunities, but talent can't be purchased or inherited. You succeeded because you're exceptional. You manipulated my entire life. The words exploded from her with a force that made me flinch. Every conversation we've had about healthcare, every time I explained medical concepts to you like you were learning something new, every moment I felt sorry for your situation, it was all lies. Not lies, selective truth. I am your mother, who loves you. I am a woman fighting cancer. I am someone who's made sacrifices to protect what matters most. Those things are completely real. Selective truth? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mom, I've spent the last 2 years feeling guilty about my success while you pretended to struggle. I've turned down promotions because I thought you needed more support. I've been planning to use my bonus to pay for your medical expenses. I've been lying awake at night, worried about your financial security. Each revelation was like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on protecting Madison from the burden of wealth that I'd never considered the burden of watching her mother appear to fail. In trying to teach her authentic values, I'd created authentic guilt about her own achievements. I never wanted you to limit yourself because of me, I said desperately. Everything I did was to ensure you'd succeed based on your own merit, not because of family connections or inherited advantages. By lying to me for my entire adult life, by letting me pity you, by making me feel like I had to choose between my career and taking care of my struggling mother, Madison turned from the window, her eyes bright with tears that looked more like fury than sadness. Do you have any idea what you've done to us? To me? To my ability to trust anything about my own life? The question hung in the air between us, unanswerable and devastating. I'd thought I was protecting our relationship by hiding my success. Instead, I'd poisoned it with deception so elaborate that the truth felt like betrayal rather than revelation. Madison, I know this is overwhelming, but… Overwhelming? She was gathering her purse, her composure, her dignity, preparing to leave before I could explain anything else. Mom, I don't even know who you are anymore. The woman I thought was my mother doesn't exist. You're a stranger who's been wearing her face for 23 years. She walked toward the door, then stopped without turning around. I need time. I need to figure out what was real and what was performance. I need to understand how much of my own life has been based on lies you told me about yourself. Madison, please. No. She opened the door, pausing in the threshold. You chose to lie to me for over 2 decades. Now I'm choosing to take time to figure out if there's anything left between us that's actually true. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything I'd built my life around protecting. I sat in my executive chair, surrounded by evidence of achievements I'd never been able to share with the person who mattered most, and wondered if honesty had come too late to save the relationship I'd sacrificed everything to preserve. Outside, my window's Seattle continued its daily business, unaware that the anonymous donor who'd quietly revolutionized their healthcare system had just lost the only thing that had ever really mattered to her. The truth was finally out. Now I had to discover whether it would set us free or destroy us completely. The silence that followed Madison's departure felt like the aftermath of an explosion. Debris everywhere, damage assessment impossible. The air itself changed by what had just occurred. I sat in my executive chair for 20 minutes after she left, staring at the scattered documents that had revealed my double life, trying to comprehend that the moment I'd dreaded for 23 years had finally arrived. My phone rang constantly. Jennifer fielding calls from board members who needed decisions, researchers awaiting funding approvals, hospital administrators requiring guidance on policy changes. The empire I'd built continued demanding attention. But for the first time since I'd started this elaborate deception, none of it seemed to matter compared to the devastation I'd just witnessed in my daughter's eyes. 3 days passed in limbo. Madison didn't return my calls, didn't respond to my texts, didn't acknowledge the detailed letter I'd had delivered to her office explaining the history behind every choice I'd made. Through my network of professional connections, I learned that she'd requested emergency family leave from Henderson and Associates, citing a personal crisis that required immediate attention. Her colleagues, the same ones who'd discussed my burden on her career, were apparently puzzled by the sudden absence of their most reliable senior executive. On the 4th day, she appeared at my real home for the first time in her adult life. I'd been expecting her eventually, but seeing her standing at the gates of my Magnolia estate was still shocking. The property was everything my Fremont apartment wasn't: a sprawling contemporary home with landscaped gardens, a 3-car garage, and views of Puget Sound that probably cost more per year in property taxes than Madison believed I earned annually. She stood at the intercom with the same expression she'd worn in my office, but now there was something else mixed with the confusion. A kind of grim determination that reminded me of myself at her age. "Let me in," she said when I answered the intercom. "We need to finish this conversation." The drive from the gate to the house gave her 90 seconds to process the full scope of what I'd hidden from her. Manicured lawns, professional landscaping, architectural details that spoke of significant wealth, an infinity pool that reflected the Seattle skyline. By the time she parked her BMW next to my Mercedes, the car she'd never seen me drive, her face had shifted from surprise to something approaching anger. "How many houses do you own?" she asked without preamble as I opened the front door. 3. I stepped aside to let her into the foyer with its 20-foot ceilings and custom chandelier. "This one, a smaller place in Whistler for when I need to think, and a condo in Boston near some of the research facilities I work with." Madison walked through my home like an investigator cataloging evidence. She examined the art on the walls, original pieces by Northwest artists whose careers I'd quietly supported. She studied the library filled with medical textbooks and research journals, the home office with its multiple computer monitors and secure communication equipment, the wine cellar stocked with bottles worth more than her annual salary. "This is obscene," she said finally, standing in the living room that overlooked Elliott Bay. "All these years, watching you count coupons and worry about rent, and you were living like this?" "Not living like this. I spent maybe 20 nights, a year in this house, usually when I had video conferences with international researchers or needed to review confidential documents. Most of the time I stayed in the Fremont apartment because that's where Grace Martinez, the records clerk, lived." "God, listen to yourself." Madison turned from the windows, her face flushed with an anger I'd rarely seen from her. "Grace Martinez, the records clerk, Grace Martinez, the CEO. You talk about yourself like you're playing different characters in a movie? Which one is real? Which one is my mother?" "Both." "Neither. I don't know anymore." The admission came out more honestly than I'd intended. "Madison, I started this deception to protect our relationship after your father's custody challenge. But somewhere along the way, it became so complex that I lost track of where the performance ended and the authentic person began." She laughed, but it was bitter. "Authentic? Mom, nothing about you has been authentic. Every conversation we've ever had has been filtered through whatever character you decided to play that day. Every piece of advice you gave me, every value you claimed to teach me, every moment of supposed struggle we shared, it was all theater." "The values were real?" I protested. "Everything I tried to teach you about working hard, treating people with respect, using your abilities to help others, those came from who I really am, not from the role I was playing." "Did they? Because right now I'm wondering if Dr. Grace Martinez, the CEO, actually believes any of those things, or if they were just part of the humble working mother character you created to manipulate me." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "Manipulate? You? What else would you call it?" Madison was pacing now, her marketing executive energy channeled into dismantling everything we'd built together. "You let me feel guilty about my success. You watched me limit my career opportunities because I thought you needed support. You accepted my attempts to help with expenses you didn't have. If that's not manipulation, what is it?" I sank into one of the leather chairs that Madison had never seen before, feeling every one of my 62 years. It was protection. Misguided, maybe, but protection. Protection from what? From knowing my mother was successful? From being proud of your achievements? From understanding that the woman who raised me was actually remarkable rather than ordinary? Protection from becoming entitled. From valuing money over character. From the kind of person your father's family wanted you to become. I looked up at her, this brilliant woman I'd raised while hiding my own brilliance. "Madison, you have integrity, work ethic, genuine concern for others. Would you have developed those qualities if you'd grown up knowing your mother was wealthy? Enough to solve any problem with a phone call? I guess we'll never know because you never gave me the chance to find out." She stopped pacing, facing me directly. "You made that choice for me. You decided I couldn't handle the truth about who you were. You determined that I needed to be protected from my own mother's success. Your father's custody challenge happened when I was 14. The words exploded from her. "I've been an adult for over a decade. I've built a career, gotten married and divorced, made my own mistakes and my own successes. At what point did you plan to trust me with the truth about who you actually are?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable because I'd never really planned for this moment. The deception had become so natural, so embedded in how I related to Madison, that I'd never seriously considered what honesty might look like. "I was afraid," I admitted finally. "Afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd question everything about our relationship. Every memory, every moment of connection, every piece of love we'd shared." "Well, "Congratulations," Madison said, her voice cold. "Mission accomplished. I am questioning everything. Was it real when you taught me to bake cookies from scratch, or were you playing the role of the humble single mother? Was it genuine when you listened to me worry about college expenses, or were you secretly planning to pay for everything through anonymous scholarships? Was it authentic when you told me you were proud of my achievements, or were you thinking about how you'd manipulated circumstances to make them possible?" Each question was like salt in an open wound, but they were fair. Questions. Necessary questions. Questions I should have anticipated but somehow never had. "The love was real," I said desperately. "Whatever else you doubt, please don't doubt that. Every moment of pride, every sacrifice I made, every choice that prioritized your well-being over my convenience, that all came from authentic love." Love. Built on lies is still built on lies, Mom. Madison moved toward the door, her decision made. I need time to figure out who Grace Martinez actually is. Not the records clerk, not the CEO, but the person underneath all the performance. Because right now, I honestly don't know if that person exists. "Madison, please." "No." She turned back one last time. "You spent 23 years deciding what I could and couldn't handle about your life. Now I'm taking control of that decision. I'll contact you when I'm ready. If I'm ever ready." The door closed behind her with the same finality as it had in my office 4 days earlier. But this time, she was leaving with full knowledge of who I was, which somehow made her absence even more devastating. I sat in my beautiful home surrounded by evidence of everything I'd accomplished while hiding from the person who mattered most, and realized that success without authenticity might be the emptiest achievement of all. The reckoning had begun, and I had no idea whether either of us would survive it. The weeks that followed felt like living in suspended animation. I moved, through my days maintaining the empire I'd built while Madison processed the revelation that had shattered both our worlds. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was finally free to be completely myself for the first time in over 2 decades. Yet I'd never felt more isolated or uncertain about who that person actually was. My professional life continued with mechanical precision. Board meetings where I made decisions affecting thousands of patients, research reviews that could accelerate breakthrough treatments, funding approvals that would save lives I'd never meet. But every achievement felt hollow without the possibility of sharing it with the person I'd built everything for. Dr. Patricia Evans, my oncologist, noticed the change during my weekly treatment sessions. "Grace, your numbers are excellent. The cancer is responding beautifully to treatment. But you seem different lately, more withdrawn. How are you managing the emotional aspects of recovery?" The question was more complex than she could imagine. "How do you explain that you're grieving the loss of a relationship with your daughter while simultaneously celebrating her finally knowing who you really are? How do you describe the relief of no longer maintaining an elaborate deception mixed with terror that honesty has destroyed everything you were trying to protect?" "I'm processing some major life changes," I told her, which was perhaps the most honest thing I'd said to a medical professional in years when speaking as a patient rather than a colleague. Sometimes healing requires breaking things down before you can build them back up properly. The support group at the cancer center became my unexpected lifeline during those difficult weeks. These people had known me only as Grace the records clerk, but their acceptance wasn't based on my professional achievements or financial status. It was rooted in shared experience of facing mortality and finding strength in community. "You seem lighter somehow," observed Maria, a breast cancer survivor whose second battle I'd been quietly funding through one of my patient assistance programs. "Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally put it down." She was more perceptive than she knew. I had been carrying something heavy, the weight of living 2 lives, of constantly calculating which version of myself was appropriate for any given moment, of loving someone while hiding fundamental truths about who I was. "I told my daughter something important," I said, choosing my words carefully. Something I should have told her years ago. It didn't go well, but it needed to happen. Adult children, sighed Robert, whose prostate cancer treatment I'd helped, designed through research grants to his oncology team. They think they know everything about us, then get upset when they discover we're more complicated than they assumed. My son still can't believe I had a life before he was born. The difference, of course, was that Robert's revelations probably involved youthful adventures or forgotten talents, not a hidden medical empire built through decades of deception. But the sentiment resonated. Madison was struggling to reconcile the mother she'd known with the woman I'd revealed myself to be. Through my professional network, I learned fragments about how Madison was handling the revelation. She'd extended her family leave from Henderson and Associates, citing personal circumstances requiring extended attention. Her colleagues were concerned but respectful, covering her client responsibilities while speculating about what could have caused such a dramatic departure from her typically reliable professional presence. I discovered she'd been researching me, not the records clerk she'd known, but Dr. Grace Martinez, the medical professional. She'd accessed my published research papers, reviewed my speaking engagements at medical conferences, traced the funding sources for programs she'd been marketing without knowing their true origin. She was constructing a picture of who her mother really was, separate from the carefully crafted persona I'd maintained. The investigation was thorough and deeply personal. Madison had requested her own medical records from childhood, reviewing documentation that would show how her health care had been managed and funded. She'd contacted her father in London, demanding explanations about their divorce and custody arrangement that she'd never needed as a teenager, but required as an adult trying to understand her mother's choices. David's conversation with Madison, which I learned about through mutual acquaintances, was apparently illuminating and devastating in equal measure. He admitted that the custody challenge had been motivated by wounded pride as much as parental concern. He acknowledged that the restrictions placed on my career advancement had been designed to keep me in my place, rather than protect Madison's well-being. Most significantly, he revealed that he'd suspected for years that I hadn't actually given up my medical career, but had found ways to continue the work that mattered to me. "Your mother was too brilliant to just disappear," he told Madison during a video call that apparently lasted 3 hours. "I always wondered how she was really spending her time, how she managed to stay current with medical developments despite supposedly working in records management. I suspected she was consulting or researching, but I never imagined the scope of what she'd actually built." The revelation that her father had suspected my deception while Madison had remained completely unaware added another layer of complexity to her processing. She'd been the only person in the family who'd fully believed the fiction I'd constructed, which made her feel both protected and patronized. Meanwhile, my own reflection was equally challenging. Living openly as myself for the first time in decades forced me to confront how much of my identity had become wrapped up in the performance. Grace Martinez, the records clerk, wasn't entirely fictional. She represented aspects of my personality that were real and important. The humility, the focus on service over recognition, the commitment to values over material success. These weren't acts I'd performed, but principles I genuinely held. The problem was that I'd expressed these authentic values through deceptive means, which complicated everything about who I actually was. Was I the brilliant medical researcher who'd revolutionized cancer treatment? Or was I the humble working mother who'd sacrificed recognition for her daughter's benefit? The answer, I was beginning to understand, was that I was both and neither. A complex person who'd fragmented herself so completely that integration seemed almost impossible. My therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, someone I'd finally started seeing after my diagnosis, forced me to confront mortality and authenticity. Helped me understand that identity isn't singular or static. People contain multitudes, and the challenge isn't choosing which version of yourself is real, but learning to integrate different aspects of your personality into a coherent whole. You've been living as if Grace the mother and Grace the professional were incompatible, she observed during one session. But Madison is struggling because she can't reconcile them either. Perhaps the path forward isn't choosing between identities, but helping both of you understand how they can coexist. The insight was profound, but practically challenging. How do you integrate 23 years of careful separation? How do you become whole when the people who matter most have only known fragments of who you are? 6 weeks after the revelation, I received the first communication from Madison since she'd left my house. Not a phone call or text message, but a formal letter delivered to my office by messenger service. The envelope was addressed to Dr. Grace Martinez, CEO, an acknowledgement of my professional identity that felt both hopeful and carefully distant. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Madison's letterhead, typed with the precision she brought to business correspondence. Dr. Martinez, I need time to understand who you are beyond the roles you've played. I've spent 6 weeks researching your professional achievements and reviewing our personal history through the lens of what I now know. The picture that emerges is complex and doesn't fit easily into categories of right or wrong, loving or manipulative. I'm not ready to see you yet, but I'm ready to begin conversations about whether we can build something honest from what remains after the deceptions are removed. If you're willing to participate in family counseling with a therapist who specializes in trust reconstruction, I'd like to try. This isn't forgiveness. It's not reconciliation. It's an attempt to discover whether Grace Martinez, the mother, and Grace Martinez, the medical professional, can exist in the same relationship with Madison Martinez, the daughter who's trying to figure out who she actually is when her entire family history has been rewritten. Let me know if you're willing to try. Madison. I read the letter 17 times, analyzing each word choice, each formal phrase, each careful boundary she'd established. It wasn't the warm reconciliation I'd hoped for, but it was something I'd feared might be impossible. A chance to build something real from the ruins of what we'd shared. The separation was ending, but the real work of discovering who we could become together was just beginning. 6 months after Madison's letter, I sat in Dr. Sarah Chen's family therapy office on a Thursday afternoon in May, watching my daughter arrive with the punctuality that had made her successful in marketing and the cautious expression that had become standard when dealing with me. The sessions had been difficult, sometimes brutal, but they'd created the first space in 23 years where both versions of myself could exist simultaneously without apology or deception. How are we feeling about today's session? Doctor. Chen asked as we settled into the familiar chairs that had witnessed months of careful reconstruction. Madison, you mentioned wanting to discuss the Henderson and Associates situation. Grace, you had some thoughts about moving forward with integrated authenticity. Madison had returned to work 3 months earlier, but the experience had been complicated by her new understanding of her professional history. Discovering that her mother owned stakes in several of her clients' companies, that research she'd promoted had been funded by foundations I'd established, that opportunities she'd earned had been quietly facilitated by my network. It had shaken her confidence in ways that required ongoing attention. I've been thinking about the Harmony Medical Center campaign, Madison said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality she'd perfected during our sessions. My team has developed an initiative to highlight anonymous donors who've transformed healthcare in the region. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm essentially marketing my mother's philanthropy while she sits as an anonymous benefactor. Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. How does that feel for both of you? Complex, I admitted. Part of me wants to maintain the anonymity that's protected our family privacy for decades. But part of me recognizes that continuing to hide might perpetuate the same patterns that created our problems. Madison leaned forward slightly. A gesture I'd learned indicated she was ready to engage, rather than simply endure the session. I've been thinking about that too. The campaign could be an opportunity for us to model what authentic relationship looks like. What if we told the real story? The suggestion surprised me. For months, Madison had been adamant about maintaining strict boundaries between her professional life and our personal healing process. The idea that she might be ready to integrate those aspects of her world felt like significant progress. "What would that look like?" Dr. Chen asked. "Honestly, I don't know." Madison's laugh was small but genuine, the first I'd heard from her since the revelation. "But I've spent 6 months trying to separate the mother I thought I knew from the medical pioneer I never knew existed. Maybe it's time to stop treating them as different people and start understanding how they're the same person." The breakthrough that led to this moment had come 3 weeks earlier, during what Dr. Chen later called our integration session. Madison had been processing her anger about missed opportunities to know her mother's real self, and I'd been defending the necessity of protecting her from burdens she wasn't ready to handle. "I keep thinking about the support group," Madison had said suddenly, interrupting our familiar debate about protection versus manipulation. "The cancer patients who love you because you listen to their concerns and remember their grandchildren's names and show up consistently without any agenda except caring about their well-being. That's not performance, is it?" "No," I'd admitted. "That's probably the most authentic part of who I am. But you're also the woman who funded the research that developed their treatments, who designed the patient services that support their families, who created the accessibility programs that let them afford care. That's the same person, isn't it?" "Yes." "So maybe the problem isn't that you've been living 2 lives," Madison had continued, working through the logic that would eventually lead to healing. "Maybe the problem is that you've been afraid to show me that one person can be both humble and extraordinary, both service-oriented and successful, both my mother and someone who changes the world." The insight had shifted everything. We'd spent months trying to reconcile different versions of me when the real work was integrating them into a complete picture of who I actually was. Now, sitting in Dr. Chen's office discussing Madison's marketing campaign, we were finally ready to test that integration in the real world. "There's something else," Madison said, pulling out her tablet with the professional efficiency I recognized from boardroom presentations. "I've been developing a proposal, not just for the marketing campaign, but for our relationship." She turned the screen toward me, revealing a detailed presentation titled, "The Martinez Foundation, a new model for family philanthropy." "I want to work with you," she said, her voice carrying the excitement I remembered from her childhood when she'd discovered something that captured her imagination. "Not as your daughter who needs protection from your success, but as your partner who can help you be more effective in the work that matters to you." The proposal was sophisticated, thoughtful, and completely unexpected. Madison had researched family foundation models, studied collaborative philanthropy structures, and designed a framework that would allow us to work together while maintaining our individual professional identities. The foundation would focus on healthcare accessibility and innovation, she explained, clicking through slides that demonstrated months of careful planning. "You'd continue the medical and research leadership that you're brilliant at. I'd handle strategic communications, public relations, and stakeholder engagement, the skills I've developed that could actually amplify your impact rather than just market programs you've created." I stared at the presentation, seeing my life's work reflected through my daughter's strategic vision. She'd identified gaps in my approach, opportunities I'd missed by maintaining anonymity, ways that transparency could actually increase effectiveness rather than compromise it. "Madison, this is remarkable," I said, meaning it completely. "But are you sure you want to leave Henderson and Associates? You've built an impressive career there." "I've built a career based partly on opportunities you created," she corrected, gently. "I'd rather build something with you based on complete honesty about who we both are and what we're both capable of achieving together." Dr. Chen smiled, the first time I'd seen her professional composure crack during our sessions. "This sounds like integration to me. How does it feel to imagine working together authentically? Terrifying, I admitted. I've spent so long protecting Madison from the complexities of my world that the idea of inviting her into it completely feels like jumping off a cliff. Good terrifying or bad terrifying? Madison asked. Good terrifying. Like the feeling I had when I made my first major research breakthrough, or when I decided to fund my first anonymous program. Scared but excited about possibilities I can't fully imagine yet. Madison reached across the space between our chairs and took my hand. The first voluntary physical contact we'd had since the revelation. Mom, I don't need protection from your success anymore. I need partnership with the woman who raised me to care about making a difference in the world. 6 months later, the Martinez Foundation officially launched with a public event that brought together medical professionals, community leaders, and patients whose lives had been touched by programs we'd developed. Madison stood at the podium introducing me not as Grace Martinez, the humble records clerk, or Dr. Grace Martinez, the medical pioneer, but as her mother and partner, a woman whose commitment to healing had shaped both their lives in profound ways. My mother taught me that authentic success isn't about recognition or wealth, Madison told the audience. It's about using whatever abilities you have to make life better for people who need help. For years, she demonstrated those values while hiding the full scope of her own achievements. Today, we're choosing transparency over protection, partnership over deception, and shared purpose over individual accomplishment. The applause was warm, but what mattered most was the look Madison gave me as I approached the microphone. Pride mixed with affection, respect combined with love. The expression of a daughter who finally knew her mother completely and chose to celebrate rather than hide from that knowledge. 23 years ago, I made choices based on fear, I told the gathering. Fear that success would corrupt relationship, that honesty would damage love, that authenticity might cost me what mattered most. I've learned that the opposite is true. Love grows stronger when it's built on truth. Relationships flourish when they're based on complete understanding. And authenticity doesn't threaten what matters, it protects it. Madison and I work together now in the offices of the Martinez Foundation, located in a wing of Harmony Medical Center that bears both our names. She handles strategic communications while I focus on research partnerships and clinical applications. We argue sometimes about approach and priorities, but our disagreements come from different perspectives on shared values rather than hidden agendas or managed perceptions. The cancer that brought us to the breaking point is in remission, treated, with protocols I helped develop and supported by services Madison helped design. We attend my follow-up appointments together, not because she's protecting her struggling mother, but because we're partners in everything now, including the ongoing work of staying healthy enough to continue changing the world together. The story of my double life has become part of the Martinez Foundation's public narrative, not as a cautionary tale about deception, but as an example of how love can survive even the most elaborate mistakes when people choose authenticity over fear. Some evenings, we sit in my real office, now our shared space, reviewing grant applications and research proposals while the Seattle skyline glitters beyond windows that no longer hide anything important. Madison might discuss a communication strategy while I explain the medical science behind treatments we're considering. Funding. We're both completely ourselves, completely honest, completely present in ways that seemed impossible during the decades of careful performance. Do you ever regret the years we lost to the deception? Madison asked recently during one of these working dinners. I regret the lost authenticity, I said after considering the question carefully. But I don't regret raising a daughter with integrity, work ethic, and genuine concern for others. Those values were real, even when the context was fictional. Those values came from you, Madison replied. Not from Grace, the records clerk, or Dr. Martinez, the CEO, but from the mother who loved me enough to sacrifice recognition for what she believed was my benefit. Even if the sacrifice was misguided, the love was authentic. The rain that once symbolized my isolation now sounds like possibility against our office windows. We've learned that authenticity isn't about choosing between different versions of yourself. It's about integrating them into a complete person who can love and work and contribute to the world without apology or disguise. Madison was right about integration. The woman who empties trash cans and the woman who revolutionizes medical treatment are the same person, someone who believes that every form of service matters, whether it's cleaning offices or curing cancer. The mother who taught values. Through a parent's struggle and the philanthropist who changes lives through strategic giving are the same person, someone who's discovered that authenticity amplifies impact rather than compromising it. The Martinez Foundation has funded breakthrough research, established treatment centers, and created accessibility programs that have saved thousands of lives. But our greatest achievement is simpler and more personal. We've proven that love can survive truth, that relationships can be rebuilt on honesty, and that families can be stronger when they're built on authenticity rather than protection. The secret is finally out, and it's set us both free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.